outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Weekly Review. I'm your host, Paul Hazard, and joining me on today's panel, we have Christopher Bowles, Brent Poland, and Claire Cannon. How are you all?
Good, thank you.
Good. Now, the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that we are in Studio 2 at TTR headquarters today. Now, if you're listening on the podcast and not watching us live on YouTube, well, first of all, shame on you, because we've all been in makeup since 5 a.m. this morning and we're looking radiant. And secondly, let me just help you by building a picture of Studio 2, which has been kindly donated to us by Elon Musk. So we're seated around a magnificent table with the latest microphones, banks of laser display screens, the latest computer equipment, and just total comfort, with Leanne Lax, who's looking after us all in the background, up in the production booth there. Anyway, enough silliness from me. Let's get on with some serious stories after a word from our sponsors.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. John Catt have an exceptional collection of book titles that cover a range of educational topics, ideas and research. The books are aimed at forward-thinking schools and support best practice teaching for both primary and secondary education. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order.
Introducing Reading Solutions UK, home to Dreambox Reading Plus, the online reading development programme, improving outcomes for students and schools nationwide. Create stronger readers in your school from Key Stage 2 to beyond GCSE, using Reading Plus's evidence-based adaptive technology. Reading Plus accurately assesses your students' skills gaps and places them on a personalised learning pathway, built to accelerate their strengths and improve on their areas for development. You can try the programme with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot today.
Welcome back, everybody. This week, a couple of news outlets spoke to Dame Alison Peacock, a former principal who took on a failing school and turned it around into a very successful school. Now, she cites 3 key attributes as being central to her work as a principal. The first, she says, is to create a place where joy can happen. Secondly, she talks a lot about valuing people and letting them know that you value them. And thirdly, modeling optimism. It all sounds great. Christopher, is it possible to say with conviction that in general schools in the UK are places where there's joy, there's optimism, and people feel valued?
I think it could be. I suppose the question really is what's stopping them from being so. And I think we've covered some of those challenges quite extensively here in previous weeks. I think Dame Alison is right on many of the points, actually, that she makes about leadership. I mean, if the school is not led by someone who enjoys being there, then how can pupils and staff really be expected to enjoy the prospect of coming in every day and giving their best? So I'd strongly agree with that one. I think a joyous, optimistic school is a place in which everyone has a meaningful role in supporting the development of a good academic program. That's obviously what schools are for on one level, but also a rich extracurricular life too, and regular opportunities to enjoy the company of others in a setting that isn't just based around learning stuff. If I think back to my last week, last Thursday, my entire school took a full day out of academic lessons to reflect upon the importance of prayer for Christians through a variety of discussion-based, craft-based and outdoor activities. The whole day was focused on joyful and optimistic cooperation with others among our community. And this was, for my Year 13 tutees, their very last house retreat. So for them at least, last Thursday was both joyful and optimistic. So it can be done. I'd like to think that joy and optimism will continue throughout the rest of the year. But I think schools have to be a bit more imaginative about how they plan for it to be a part of their students' daily experience and their staff's daily experience. But I wholly endorse many of the things that are said in that article. I think it's a good starting point for discussion.
I'm just wondering, as a quick follow-up, Christopher, do you notice any other changes or any other impacts as a result of your school kind of taking a day standstill, having a retreat, having reflection? Do you see that reflected in, the following weeks in their academic concentration focus? Or
Yeah, we do. Often the place we see it most strongly is in our boarding house, because in these particular days, the groups of students we bring together are in different age groups, in different year groups, and the way they interact with one another gets stronger and stronger over the course of the year as they spend more time doing things in that same group. So the interactions between our Year 9 students and our Year 13 students are that much stronger because they've spent that time away from the books, if you like, being in community together. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Brent, if I could come to you, Christopher's saying, Dame Alison Peacock's, outlook it's fantastic. It's a bit aspirational. The reality is we live in an era where command and control principles are the order of the day. In fact, I think you've interviewed one quite recently, Catherine Birbelsing. And I'm just wondering then, is it possible that Dame Alison Peacock's model, which is a much more humane model, is it possible to have that in schools today, or do we need those command and control principles?
Oh, I find myself conflicted. Idealistically speaking, you can, absolutely. But I think context is very important. I think the context of the school, the culture of the school, the intake of the school, location of the school, the parental attitudes of the school. I think sometimes it's the Goldilocks principle of the porridge has to be the right consistency, the right taste for the right person, And goes for staff. Some staff would be very happy to teach in a command control structure, and some staff, like myself, want the freedom to express themselves. And I think what causes a lot of issues with staff is when they go to a school and then the school culture is changed from top down. And I think that's been one of the massive problems in education, is that the school you're in has had a culture that's been established over generations, and all of a sudden some faceless CEO bureaucrat comes in with some policies from halfway across the country and says, this trust now will operate along these lines. You may all have the same haircut. You may all wear this. And they don't take into context the long-standing cultural traditions of some schools, and they destroy those. And I think a lot of problems in education have been caused by trying to standardize the unstandardizable. And that is where you get it wrong. So I appreciate, some schools have needs for, the slants and the command control for a period of time, but not long term. I don't agree that you should have that level of control over children long term. Equally, if you have all the freedom in the world, I start to think you'll end up with Lord of the Flies. You'll end up with some complete and utter chaos. I think it's up to individual leaders to set the tone for the school. The problem is a lot of head teachers just don't have a level of control because they're caretakers of schools now, because the CEOs are calling the shots. And I think that's where the disconnect has been. But I admire, and I think I went into teaching because I enjoy it. I stayed in the same school, and I'm fighting long and hard to keep that school's tradition and cultures, because exactly I want my children to be educated in the same way, because it is about, if you have a bit of fun and you are more relaxed, take your Maslow hierarchy of needs. When people are more relaxed and more open, likely to get more out of you, aren't you? And you want that intrinsic motivation. You want to go to school. You want to learn rather than being forced. And I think you can only force for so long without getting the joy and the happiness out back.
Yeah. Claire, Brent makes a good point there that, you know, on the surface, it can appear that, you know, what Dame Alison Peacock is proposing can be a bit soft. It can be a bit of a free-for-all and so on, you know. I don't think they are at all. I mean, the vast majority of my time teaching has been in a, gosh, this isn't going to go down well with some colleagues, in a Peacock style school. I'm going to get in trouble for that. But I do know that there's a much greater personal input in order to get the discipline, in order to get what you need and the focus and the outcomes you need. You know, you're not just going to stand on a stage in an assembly, rant and rave, you know, set the standards and then enforce them through behavior, but through persuasion, through listening, through talking to people and selling a vision. My question to you, Claire, is that's very exhausting. There's a huge amount of personal input. How long can people sustain? Is that sustainable, that kind of leadership, that humane leadership?
I absolutely think it is. And I'm really pleased to hear, you know, and to read about what has been said around this, because some of you may know, you know, I work in alternative provision, and what you have described is essentially how that works. And for me, it's not just about the leaders; it's about everybody. And if everybody is working in a relational way, if everybody, you know, that's the staff supporting the staff in that way, as well as supporting the students in that way, it almost becomes self-sustaining. And one of the things I think that has happened, and you read these debates online, where things do quite quickly become very polarized, is people equate rigidity as consistency. And I don't think they're the same thing. I think you can be consistent in your approach. You can be consistently optimistic. You can be consistently humane without applying blanket rigid rules. And I think if you can manage that at not just the leadership level, but everybody, then, as I say, it creates a self-sustaining system where we're all looking out for one another. We're all supporting one another. So if somebody is having a bad day, bad week, bad month, there are things in place for them. Absolutely. I think there are times when, yeah, it's tough. I'm not saying it's easy, but that's where those background mechanisms need to be in place. So that those people have that safety catch, you know, and that support when they need it.
Yeah. And JBL, one of our regular listeners, tells us his empirical model of successful schools is number one, visionary leadership; second, engaging teachers; third, focused students; and fourthly, supportive parents and staff. And I think we've more or less said all of those things. But he does go on to make the point, you know, it takes a long time to kind of develop that kind of leadership and all. Just to end this first story, just a very, very, very quick response. Dame Alison says she's not a control freak. Now, I don't like the term, but it is out there, of course. Do we have too many control freaks in education, Christopher?
I don't think I have a big enough perspective on education to answer that question, definitely. It'd be nice to see more people out of the office from time to time.
Brent, do we have too many control freaks in education?
At the top. Too many control freaks at the top, and too many control freaks at the top who dictate to people at the bottom, so it's the pecking order. So for me, you know, I want freedom to express myself. I think as teachers, autonomy is important, and I can sometimes stifle, I think, our job as creativity. I do like, you know, the captain, my captain sort of model of teaching, where we have the freedom to teach. And when you don't have that, I think that's what's driven some of us out of education, is that we are academics, intellectuals. We go into teaching because we have philosophy about how we would like to educate our children, and nobody likes being dictated to. But it's worse when people who don't like being dictated to then have to dictate to the children. So you have to pass on the sort of the pecking order, and that doesn't work for some of us, because the rebel in me just doesn't like authority, you know. And the irony is, I now have to be the authority, and it doesn't sit well with me sometimes when I think to myself, I'm looking at those children thinking, if I were you, would I like all of these meaningless tasks which I have to tick a box? I think there's too much box ticking in education, which is driving us teachers. There's too much box ticking for the children. I think we just need to free up education and get back to the purpose of education, which is to enjoy education. And yeah, you do need the odd drill sergeant, as JBL saying, you need that initially. Maybe there is a place for that, time for that, but you can't sustain that all the time. And I, honestly, I don't think it's healthy mental health when you're under that level of control all the time.
Claire, do we have too many control freaks in education?
I'm very much aligned actually with what Brent has said, and my sort of, I don't know whether you call it frustration, concern, is also the fact that, you know, we have early careers teachers now that is potentially their only experience of education, because they will have maybe been in that system as a student and are now experiencing it as, you know, this is what it's like from a teacher's perspective. So then where does this go in the next few years when we have a large proportion of the teaching population who've only ever experienced that type of leadership? And I think that's where we need to be very careful. So yes, there are too many, and it's, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in time.
Yeah, super point that once you're inculcated into that kind of a system, it's very hard to kind of see yourself as being anything else. I think we've raised as many questions as we have answered or given direction on that topic, but it's time to move on to our next story. Now, our next story takes us to Ireland and Ireland's big school secret, how a year off changes teenage lives. So just to give you some context, for the last 50 or so years, post-primary education in Ireland has not been a straight line. You don't go in at first year and just finish and move on to university or whatever. Between what Ireland calls the junior certificate and the leaving cert, which is roughly between GCSE and A-level, there is an opportunity for what they call a transition year. And that's taken up by 99% of the schools in Ireland and 80% of the students. Now, what does it mean? It's not really a gap year. The children are in school, but there's no curriculum. Okay, they do some basic maths, English, Irish, careers education, PSHE, and so on. But after that, the school, and quite often the children themselves, they come up with what they're going to do. So what sort of things do they do? Well, here's a quick flavor of some of the things that they might do. They might learn about aviation, political engagement. There are opportunities to learn, for example, how to run and manage a crime scene, how to make a burrito, use a bus timetable, what to put in your CV. And of course, I'm a big supporter of work experience, work placements, and there are opportunities for work experience and so on. Brent, this sounds amazing. I gave you a flavor of some of the things that pupils do, but what are the main outcomes of a transition year? What happens as a result?
Well, I suppose the thing is, children are not linear, and they don't learn in linear ways, and they don't learn uniformly linear. And when you look at the evidence about maturation levels, you take a Piaget, some children just don't fit the model of when the exams are sat for their brain development and their age development. And you know that old adage of the young boy in year 11 who's 15 who's sitting the GCSEs, and you versus the oldest girl in the year. You know, brain development style, they're just completely different. You know, we see that, we know that, and yet we measure them exactly the same. Given them that year just gives that chance for someone to grow up, mature, takes the pressure off. I think when you're looking at mental health crisis, that would be absolutely brilliant for releasing some capacity for children to just have time to grow and develop and to explore and to learn for the sake of learning, intrinsically learning for the sake of learning, as opposed to learning because they have to, they're told to, they must. The big stick, just take the big stick away and just let them learn and express themselves. And when you look at some of the individuals, I read the article, Cillian Murphy, for instance, had that year, and he took that year to learn drama and arts. And the guy is an absolute brilliant actor.
Well, he claims he wouldn't be an actor if he hadn't had that year. He would not be an actor. Same for Paul Mescal.
Yeah, absolutely. My older brother now is a classic case study of this. My older brother was the youngest boy in the year. So I'm using that analogy. He was the youngest boy in the year. He repeated his GCSEs because he just wasn't ready. And he got that extra year. And he went on to university, became an engineer. And we always knew that. Parents built that in. My parents knew that even before he sat his GCSEs was a possibility that he was going to resit them. But it was handled along the lines of, don't worry, you're resitting your GCSEs. You just weren't ready. And then you'll get it next time. And whereas now there's such a big sort of, you must get them, you must get them. You're repeating them, reseating them. It's just a hot housing of children is destroying their love of learning. And I think we need to relax a little bit. And that would be a perfect opportunity to relax and enjoy the learning for the sake of the learning. Problem is staffing it, funding it, and all the rest of it, and getting it past league tables. Because we're so tied into this data-driven, results-based education model that we need to sort of return, I think, to the basics. And the basics is learning because you want to learn.
Yeah. And I mean, you raise a lot of points there as well. That's exactly why the transition year was introduced 50 years ago, just to take children, give them a little breather away from that. And of course, there's no assessment in the transition year. It's just learning for the sake of learning. And, children make up as much of the curriculum as the schools set for them. Christopher, is this something that could be just lifted from Ireland, transferred across to UK schools, be accepted, be implemented, just be a great thing?
In a word, no. It's something that we can't just simply transfer. I think it has many good qualities about it, and having worked alongside Irish schools that offer an Erasmus exchange experience as part of their pupils' transition year, I can clearly see the appeal of a period for pupils to discover more about themselves before they go into the next steps. If we translate it to the English particular context, I suppose my doubts are about where we might fit it in. So rather in keeping with what Brent has already said, actually, if we look at the English approach to education, government are keen to squeeze more and more and more statutory content into the school curriculum. So I can't really see anytime soon an education sector in England saying, actually, we'll step aside from that statutory content for a year. So there'd still need to be the same kind of statutory learning that we have in every other school year. I do like the idea, though, of our students doing something meaningful and personally, I suppose, personally purposeful in terms of to go next. It would certainly help students preparing their approach to university if they were doing something different after A-levels and BTECs. I mean, the number of personal statements I read as a teacher every year where you ask the student a question about what they want to do next, they don't quite have an answer, is quite high. So in principle, transition year is a good idea, but I sincerely hope the English system would be able to be flexible enough to accommodate it. That might need thought.
Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't implemented easily or smoothly in Ireland as well. It did have its objectors and so on, yeah. JBL points out this is why FE colleges are so valuable. We aren't all ready to apply ourselves fully in our youth. Oh my goodness. Don't know whether I should read the next bit out. JBL was expelled when he was 14. There's maybe a show in that. Talk to me, JBL. Claire, Christopher raises a few interesting points there. Brent alluded to them as well. In that transition year in Ireland, a lot of children, get a very different insights into themselves, very different views of themselves. We mentioned Cillian Murphy. He wouldn't be an actor if he hadn't been pushed into, doing drama in those years. We learn about children who are maybe on a course doing sciences, they take a transition year and so on, but then they end up maybe doing something else. I know it happens a lot with coding and so on now. But Claire, I'm wondering, what objections could there maybe be, to a transition year, and who could they be from, those objections?
I think there's a few questions, aren't there? And Christopher mentioned about the statutory content, and whilst that is probably a whole show and debate in itself about what should and shouldn't be in there, if we are suddenly saying a whole year is going to be allocated to doing not statutory content, then where does it go? Does it, what? So there's clearly going to be some questions from the government, from the Education Secretary, and people who are saying, actually, we need to make sure we are covering all bases. We are making sure that the students have, an appropriate level of knowledge and sort of, depth of content and everything. I think from parents as well, and actually reading around this a little bit before the show was quite interesting, because going back when it was introduced and people were saying, oh, is it just going to be sort of a DOS year, in inverted commas, they're not going to do anything. And then a sort of change as the year was implemented, and it happened a few times, parents started to say actually they could see the benefits, but still some concerns around, for those students who it doesn't work, because from my understanding, this is an optional year.
It is. Yes, it is.
So if they choose
taken
to
up
do
by
the transition
80%
year,
of pupils, yeah.
yeah, it was high, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If they choose to do the transition year and then it doesn't work for them, you get halfway through the year and actually they aren't attending, they aren't engaging with whatever their transition activities were, then what happens? Do they have another option available to them? What happens with that year then? Is it essentially becoming a year of lost learning, whether that's formal or whether it's the more informal transition things that the rest of their cohort would be doing? And I think also potentially from the students themselves, because we do live in a society now where people are driven. We have learning objectives, we have targets, we have goals, and I wonder for some of the students if that's quite a tricky thing to make a decision on. How do I get myself into a headspace where I can make a decision about something that doesn't have a specific goal or an obvious goal, because they are in this system that is all about goals and targets and tangible results. So a few different people, I think, could have some queries about it.
Yeah. I think there needs to be a kind of a cultural bedrock that is open to something like a transition year. I'm generalizing, of course, but education broadly isn't rushed in Ireland, certainly not in the same way that it is in the UK, where there is a kind of a drive, get through Key Stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, university. There seems to be a real compulsion and drive with us, whereas in Ireland, there is just something more kind of, studied about it. It's more reflective, and people are prepared to take, much more deeper and meaningful choices. Anyway, it's worth thinking about, but we really need to move on to our last story for today. Now, in our last story for today, I'm going to break the format a little bit, because today's story is about audio feedback. which the author of the story tells us saved time and students like it. Now, I'm breaking with format because I'm going to tell you about my show of the week now. Because this week, Tom Rogers spoke to Ross McGill, the Teacher Toolkit person, about feedback in a show that's absolutely packed with detail and practical advice for teachers. They looked at the 9 effective ways of implementing assessment in your class. They talk about the orange box, the KFC approach, and my favorite, non-verbal feedback. Now, and you can still catch that show on YouTube or podcast. Now, they didn't mention what today's author of this story talked about, and that is audio feedback. And if you like this story, you'll be keen to know that Tom Rogers is going to interview Alan Gillespie about this very matter in a few days' time. Leanne, have you ever used audio feedback, and what are the benefits of it, maybe?
I personally haven't used audio feedback, but we use verbal feedback all the time. But I think it's something worth looking at, actually, because although, as I mentioned before, working in alternative provision, my classes only have 3 or 4 students, complex needs, but you can tell them something and it doesn't always sink in. So actually having it recorded, having something that they could go back to, and that might just be because they weren't in a mindset to hear it. It might be that actually they go and try and work on a task and then they go, what did you say again? And actually we've all done that. To be able to replay something in the same way as you might rewatch your favorite film, I suppose, then you get the benefit of it again. So I think, for students, it's amazing. And for staff, I mean, what a time saver. We all know what workload is like. And if you can record your comments, and I think you could extend this, because I know, there's lots of talk around using it for individuals, but actually, if you had your kind of whole class feedback recorded, that was general points that everybody could learn from, and then you also have, for all or for some students, depending on the situation, those individual little snippets as well. And how many schools now are using online classrooms, Google Classroom or similar, Microsoft version, whatever, and they all have the facility to put individual feedback. So why are we still stuck in this kind of thing of writing things down when actually the power of spoken voice and the tone and the intonation in what you say, we all know you read a text and you read it and you go, oh, not very happy about that, and then the person didn't mean it like that at all. So you can convey a huge amount in how you say things, not just what you say. And for me, that's where there's a massive amount of power in audio feedback.
Christopher Clare's very positive about it and pointed out a lot of advantages and benefits. And there are a lot of people involved in feedback. There are pupils, there are parents, there are colleagues, there could even be inspectors and so on. I'm just wondering then, are there any other advantages and are there disadvantages to giving audio feedback?
Well, I think many of the things Claire says are really quite interesting. I think we have to be careful about ensuring that there is a balance, though. I mean, I can clearly see the workload advantages for teachers, but I also worry if we're making handwriting by adults an invisible skill. And if English teachers are going to be giving up on handwriting their thoughts and observations, then one can imagine that no one else is going to be making the argument that the pen is mightier than the sword. If it's seen as too much of an effort for an adult to pick up a pen. So we've got to be careful about that. Verbal feedback certainly has its place. I mean, we use it extensively in the case of A-level literature NEA work, where written feedback is expressly forbidden on student drafts. But I think in that circumstance, everyone clearly knows why that medium has been chosen. So I really do worry that we run...
Is that a workload thing, Chris, or what? Written?
No, it's a regulation thing. So the students aren't allowed to receive written feedback on English literature coursework. It has to be delivered orally.
Yeah, I've heard you say that before. Yeah, okay, yeah.
I think, we have to make sure that the message is delivered that handwriting is not only something that children do on the insistence of adults in timed conditions in a diminishing number of school subjects. If we chuck it out entirely, then I think we're going to find bigger problems later on. So balance in everything, a good Benedictine tradition.
Yeah. Gosh, that was very interesting. You took me back to my A level. I used to love getting scripts back and seeing my teacher's handwriting on it. I haven't thought about that for quite a number of years. Yeah. Brent, I wonder then, we've looked at individuals, but I wonder, are there kind of institutional barriers or obstacles or objections to audio feedback? Could some very kind of, strict managements maybe say, oh, no, this is taboo, you're not allowed this, or...
Yeah, I mean, what worries me, and I put my union hat on here, is how the spoken word can be twisted, taken out of context, and how your feedback could be objected by a parent and used against you. And I sort of think like a football coach that might turn around in the context, turn around and give his footballers an absolute, barnstorming roasting, and that might be the right thing to do. But you can imagine that then is sent home to a parent, and the parent's like, "How dare you?" And you think, well, actually, no, that's the nature of my quality of my feedback. So I think you'd have to have whole sessions and CPD sessions of when you give feedback, make sure the feedback is positive. Because could you imagine, if you turn around and you criticize little Johnny, and little Johnny's parents are, reading from the handbook of my child is positivity, you just, it's a minefield. And I think it even goes for the written word as well. You have to be so careful with feedback now, because everything you say and can do can be used in the court of law, because that's the nature of teaching now. We're there to be got at, shot at, and shot down. So audio feedback just gives another opportunity for people to get some evidence if they really are gunning for you. And that's a sad reality of the world we live in. Same when it comes to recordings of digital watches, same with teachers being recorded in classrooms. You just got to be so careful what you say now in the context of what you're saying. So that's one massive negative. So we're living in a world now where everything we say and do is scrutinized to that 9th degree, that you have to be very careful if you're giving audio feedback, that the audio feedback is not going to be used against you. However, somebody who is a very audio feedback type person, who knew, I do like giving audio feedback. I used to put audio notes during COVID on students' work. So I'd give their work back, record an audio note and a PowerPoint, and that would be my voice talking to them. And the students found that very useful, because they said it was like having you there, sir. And you think, well, actually, that's a little bit of the classroom that is able to have at home. So it has got its usage. But Christopher and Claire's points are very, very salient, and especially Christopher's point about the handwriting. I had a situation this week where the students looked at me and says, "I'd like you to take that down in your books." And they all went, "All of that, sir." And I went, "Right, here's the pen. I'm giving you 2 minutes head start." Off I went. And I literally, only 2 students in the class finished before me. And I went, "There's my handwriting, there's the work, and there's how." And they're looking at me going like, "But you're older than us, sir." And I went, "Yeah, I'm meant to be slower than you." And it was amazing that the next time they came to the task, I was like, right. And I got the timer out, and I had the camera, I had the visualizer on as I was handwriting it, literally modeling. I think, I've had enough of this. Why are you guys going so slow? I thought, not having this whatsoever. You can handwrite. You've been handwriting for years. Come on. And it was interesting how faster they got when they saw the modeling and they saw me do the handwriting. And of course, the problem was there was the odd spelling mistake in there. So you made a spelling mistake. And I was like, oh yeah. But this is what happens when you open yourself up to it. And you're like, there's a comma or 2 missing there as well. And it brought me back to my sort of traumatic childhood of like, Poland, your handwriting's not good enough. You can still read, sir. You can still read it. So it is a powerful thing to do to engage students in feedback, and all the studies show, don't they? All the studies, everything shows feedback is so important, but feedback has to be quicker. So whatever you do anyway with feedback, verbal has the advantage of possibly being quicker. So it's one of the advantage I think it has over. It's instant, it's quick, and that does fit the model of feedback coming back as quick as possible.
Oh, it wouldn't be a day with Brent without a little bit of reverse psychology. Anyway, that's all we've time for on that story. We'll be back with our shows of the week after this break. Now, I have told you about my show of the week. So, Brent, have you listened or watched anything good this week on TTR?
Yeah, Graham Stanley's last Sunday lunchtime show, which is really interesting because there's a lot of talk at the moment and chatter about SEND, neurodivergency, unmet needs. That seems to be the hot topic. So he interviewed a parent who is homeschooling two neurodivergent children and who themselves is now self-aware and diagnosed with neurodivergency. And it was just very interesting to see a different perspective for homeschooling and somebody completely outside mainstream education with the difficulties of educating children with, neurodiversity. But it was also very useful for the amount of recommendations of literature, because this is a very motivated and driven parent who has done a lot of research to come up with, I think, sort of strategies. So it was very useful, I think, for us, from a point of view of interested in meeting the needs of those children, that it might be useful to sort of just listen back and note down some of the sort of the lessons that this parent, who in himself now is an educator, because they're a parent and an educator, aren't they, really, has, and their experiences. That was Graham Stanley's lunchtime show last week.
Great. Claire, what has impressed you on TTR this week?
I enjoyed Toby Doncaster's show, which was his Wellbeing 101, which by happy coincidence, given our first topic today about finding joy in schools, was about finding joy in tasks and things that you have to do, rather than seeing things as, I have to do them, but actually what's the positive of getting them done. Well, that was a really good way of reframing something to make it, you can't force it to be enjoyable when it's maybe something that you don't, but you can see that there's a benefit in doing it. There were some interesting tips in there. So one from his guest, Dr. Poppy Gibson, about standing up to work. She was talking about being in her kitchen. She's got one of those island things, and she doesn't like to always sit down, so she's got her laptop there, and that's something that works for her. But I thought it was really interesting that they talked about the need to be much more explicit with early careers teachers, or it doesn't just have to be teachers, it could be your teaching assistants or whoever's coming into a school perhaps for the first time. It is a very intense environment, and perhaps doing more to explicitly teach and raise awareness of well-being and self-care strategies, rather than leaving it to people to find out what works for themselves, perhaps a few years down the line when they might be struggling or finding things tricky. So I thought that was really important, and especially as we move into autumn and winter and it does start to get dark, because that can have quite an impact on people as well.
Perhaps a transition year for teachers. That might be something. Yeah,
that's an idea.
Christopher, have you listened to anything good on TTR this week?
I have. My show of the week was
everything is good, but
my show of the week was Chris Wilkinson's Thursday show on lesson starters and transitions, and it was a really interesting walkthrough of his own classroom practice when teaching politics and law, and he offered some quite thought-provoking reflections on the ways that syllabus content can be usefully linked to current affairs in student discussions. So well worth a listen, I think.
Great, thank you. Well, that's all we've time for this week. Let us know if you've enjoyed the show. Thank you very much to our sponsors, John Catt Books and Reading Solutions. And thank you to the panel. That's Chris, that's Brent, and that's Claire. Thank you very much. We'll see you again next week. Same time, same place. Goodbye.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.